The gunshot echoed across the dusty streets of Redemption Creek, sending Genevieve Radcliff bolting through the evening shadows with her 3-month-old daughter clutched tightly against her chest. Blood stained the hem of her faded blue dress, though none of it was her own. Behind her, angry voices called her name as hoofbeats pounded the packed dirt roads of the small frontier town. It was 1878, and Genevieve had never felt more alone. Her breath came in ragged gasps as she darted between buildings, desperately searching for sanctuary in a town that had turned against her. The tiny church at the edge of town stood silhouetted against the setting sun, a beacon of hope in her darkest hour. The baby whimpered against her breast, sensing her mother's fear. "Hush now, Lily," Genevieve whispered, pressing her lips to the infant's forehead. "Just a little longer, my sweet." She slipped behind the weathered clapboard church, crouching beside a stack of firewood near the rear entrance. The baby's soft whimpers grew into a plaintive cry that tore at Genevieve's heart. She couldn't blame her daughter. They hadn't eaten properly in 2 days, constantly moving, hiding from the men who hunted them. "Please, Lily," she begged softly, rocking the infant. "Please be quiet." But the baby's cries only intensified, echoing in the stillness of the evening air. Genevieve closed her eyes, tears streaming down her dirt-smudged face. Everything she had done, the blood on her dress, the desperate flight, had been to protect this child. The sound of approaching footsteps made her blood run cold. Heavy boots crunched on gravel, moving with purpose toward her hiding place. Genevieve pressed herself tighter against the church wall, willing her child to silence, but it was too late. A tall shadow fell across her, and when she looked up, her eyes met the piercing blue gaze of a stranger. The man stood over 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered and imposing in a dust-covered duster coat. A weathered Stetson hat sat atop hair the color of sun-bleached wheat, and the badge on his vest caught the last rays of daylight. "Found you," he said simply, his voice neither cruel nor kind, just matter of fact. Genevieve clutched her baby tighter. "Please," she whispered, "they'll kill us both." The man's expression remained unreadable as he studied her face, then the crying infant. Behind them, voices called out, growing closer. With a fluid motion, he drew his revolver, and Genevieve's heart nearly stopped. Instead of pointing it at her, however, he turned toward the approaching voices. "You'll never hide again," he said without looking at her. "Because you won't need to." In the fading light, Genevieve finally noticed the badge on his chest, a U.S. Marshal's star. As the mob of angry men rounded the corner of the church, the stranger positioned himself between them and Genevieve. "Marshal Zachary Jennings," he announced, his voice carrying authority that stopped the crowd in their tracks. "The lady is under my protection now." The leader of the group, a red-faced man with a poorly trimmed beard, stepped forward. "That woman murdered my brother." "Self-defense isn't murder, Vernon," the marshal replied evenly. "And I've got witnesses who'll testify what your brother was trying to do to her." Genevieve stared up at the marshal's back in disbelief. How could he know? She had never seen this man before in her life, yet here he was, defending her against the men who had been hunting her for days. The baby's cries had subsided to soft hiccups. Something about the marshal's presence seemed to calm even little Lily. "This ain't over," Vernon spat, but he and his men retreated nonetheless, intimidated by the marshal's unwavering stance and the authority of his badge. When they were alone again, Marshal Jennings holstered his weapon and turned back to Genevieve. Up close, she could see the lines etched around his eyes, not from age, for he couldn't be more than 30, but from years squinting against the harsh western sun. "Madam," he said, extending a hand to help her up, "my horse is tethered at the front of the church. We should leave town before they work up enough liquid courage to try something foolish." Genevieve hesitated. "Why are you helping us?" "Because someone should have helped you days ago," he replied simply. "Now come on, it'll be full dark soon and we've got a ways to ride." With her baby held tight in one arm and her meager belongings in a small satchel, Genevieve let the stranger lead her away from Redemption Creek, a town that had never lived up to its name. As they rode double on his sturdy chestnut gelding, Genevieve felt the warmth of the marshal against her back, solid and reassuring. For the first time in months, she dared to hope that tomorrow might be better than today. They rode for hours under a canopy of stars that sparkled like diamonds scattered across black velvet. The baby slept soundly, wrapped in the marshal's spare blanket and cradled in Genevieve's arms. The steady rhythm of the horse's hooves was the only sound that broke the night's silence. "Where are we going?" Genevieve finally asked, her voice barely audible over the creaking leather of the saddle. "My cabin," Marshal Jennings replied. "About 10 miles north of here. It's not much, but it's safe." "And then what? Vernon and his men won't give up easily." The marshal was quiet for a moment. "One problem at a time, Mrs. Radcliff." Genevieve stiffened. "How do you know my name?" "I've been tracking Vernon and his gang for weeks. They've been causing trouble all through the territory. When I heard they were hunting a young widow and her baby, I started asking questions." He paused. "I know what happened to your husband, madam. I'm sorry." Tears welled in Genevieve's eyes. Thomas had been dead less than 6 months, killed in a mining accident that had left her a widow at 22 with a newborn daughter. With no family and few friends in the frontier town, she'd been vulnerable. Vernon's brother had seen that vulnerability and tried to take advantage of it. "I didn't mean to kill him," she whispered. "He broke into our home in the middle of the night. He was going to—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "You don't need to explain," the marshal said gently. "Like I told Vernon, it was self-defense. No judge would convict you." But they both knew the reality of frontier justice. In small towns like Redemption Creek, a woman's word often meant little against a man's reputation, deserved or not. Vernon's brother had been well liked among the townsmen, particularly those who frequented the saloon where he worked as a dealer. His death at the hands of a woman, no less, had stirred up a hornet's nest of resentment. The cabin came into view just as false dawn began to lighten the eastern sky. It was small but solidly built of rough-hewn logs, nestled against a backdrop of pine trees with a small creek burbling nearby. Marshal Jennings dismounted first, then carefully helped Genevieve down, mindful of the sleeping infant in her arms. "It's not much," he said, unlocking the door, "but it's home when I'm not on the trail." Inside was simple but tidy. A stone fireplace dominated one wall with a wooden table and 2 chairs positioned nearby. A bed with a patchwork quilt stood in one corner, and a small kitchen area occupied another. Rifles hung on the wall, and bookshelves surprisingly well stocked lined another. "You can take the bed," he said, moving to light a lamp. "I'll sleep by the fire." "I can't put you out of your own bed," Genevieve protested weakly, though exhaustion was evident in every line of her body. "Madam, I've slept on the ground more nights than I can count. The floor here is luxury by comparison." His tone brooked no argument. "There's fresh water from the well out back, and I'll heat some for the baby if you need it." Within an hour, a fire was crackling in the hearth, warming the cabin against the pre-dawn chill. Lily had awakened hungry, and after feeding her, Genevieve had fallen into an exhausted sleep on the marshal's bed, the baby nestled beside her. When she awoke, the sun was high in the sky, streaming through the cabin's small windows. For a moment, disoriented by actual rest, she couldn't remember where she was. Then the events of the previous night came rushing back, and she sat up quickly, reaching for Lily, who wasn't there. Panic surged through her until she heard the soft murmur of a deep voice from the main room. Wrapping the quilt around her shoulders, she padded to the doorway and stopped short at the sight before her. Marshal Jennings sat in a rocking chair by the fire, little Lily cradled in his large hands. He was reading to her from a book of poetry, his voice gentle as he recited verses that seemed incongruous coming from such a rugged man. "She shall be sportive as the fawn, that wild with glee across the lawn, or up the mountain springs," he reads softly, his weathered finger carefully turning a page while balancing the infant. Something in Genevieve's chest tightened at the sight. It had been so long since anyone had shown kindness to her or her daughter. The marshal looked up then, catching her gaze, and for a moment neither spoke. "She was fussing," he explained, a slight flush coloring his tanned cheeks. "Didn't want to wake you, so I thought I'd keep her company." "You like poetry." It wasn't what she'd meant to say, but it was the question that tumbled out. A smile touched his lips. "Wordsworth. My mother taught school back east before she married my father and came west. She made sure I had books." He glanced at the sleeping baby. Your daughter seems to have good taste in literature already. Genevieve crossed the room and carefully took Lily from him. Thank you, she said, and they both knew she meant for far more than just watching the baby. There's coffee on the stove, he replied, standing. And I managed to hunt down some eggs from the chickens that like to pretend they're wild. You should eat. Over a simple breakfast, Marshal Jennings, who asked her to call him Zach, explained that he would need to ride into the nearest town that afternoon to send telegrams to his superiors about Vernon and his gang. I need to report what happened and make sure charges are filed properly, he explained. That way, even if they come looking for you, they'll be the ones running from the law. Fear flashed across Genevieve's face. You're leaving us here alone. Just for a few hours, he assured her. The cabin is well hidden, and I doubt they even know to look in this direction. But just in case, he stood and removed a revolver from a drawer, checking it before placing it on the table in front of her. Do you know how to use this? Genevieve nodded slowly. Thomas had insisted she learn after they moved west. I'm a decent shot, she admitted. But I've never not until that night. Hopefully, you won't need to, Zach said firmly. I'll be back before sundown. Keep the doors barred, and if anyone comes who isn't me, there's a cellar trapdoor under the rug by the pantry. Hide there with Lily if you need to. After he'd gone, Genevieve found herself staring at the door, already missing the sense of security his presence provided. She shook her head, chiding herself for such thoughts. She barely knew the man, no matter how kind he'd been. To distract herself, she began exploring the cabin more thoroughly. It was clean but showed the signs of a bachelor's lifestyle, practical rather than comfortable. The bookshelves surprised her most. Alongside practical manuals on farming, hunting, and law enforcement were volumes of poetry, philosophy, and classic literature that seemed at odds with the Marshal's rugged exterior. She was thumbing through a well-worn copy of the Odyssey when Lily began to cry. As she fed her daughter, Genevieve gazed out the window at the peaceful landscape surrounding the cabin. Pine trees swayed gently in the breeze, and birds darted between branches. It was beautiful, a stark contrast to the dust and grit of Redemption Creek. Could we be happy here, little one? She whispered to her daughter, just for a while, but she knew it was a foolish thought. The Marshal was merely doing his duty, offering temporary sanctuary until he could ensure their safety. Then they would move on to where, she didn't yet know. With Thomas gone and her reputation in tatters, options for a young widow with a baby were limited. The afternoon stretched long, and as the shadows began to lengthen without any sign of Zach's return, Genevieve found herself growing anxious. She had just begun to wonder if something had happened to him when the sound of approaching hoofbeats made her freeze. She quickly doused the lamp and reached for the revolver, heart pounding as she moved to the window. Relief flooded her when she recognized Zach's broad-shouldered silhouette, but it was short-lived as she realized he wasn't alone. A second rider accompanied him, smaller and slighter. As they dismounted, Genevieve could see it was a woman, wrapped in a practical traveling cloak. She felt an unexpected and irrational pang of disappointment, followed immediately by embarrassment at her own reaction. Of course, the Marshal had a life of his own, perhaps even a sweetheart or a wife she hadn't considered. When Zach knocked on the door with their agreed-upon signal, Genevieve unbarred it with the revolver still in hand. His eyebrows rose slightly at the sight of it. "Good girl," he said approvingly, "but it's just us." He stepped aside to reveal a woman in her 50s, her dark hair streaked with silver and her eyes kind but sharp. "Genevieve Radcliff, this is Dr. Eleanor Watson," Zach introduced them. "Doc, this is Mrs. Radcliff and her daughter, Lily." "Doctor?" Genevieve repeated in surprise. Female physicians were rare, especially in the Western Territories. "Don't sound so shocked, dear," the older woman said with a warm smile. "Someone has to patch up these foolish men when they get themselves shot, and I find I have steadier hands than most." She set down a medical bag. "Marshal Jennings thought I should take a look at you and your little one, make sure you're both healthy after your ordeal." Genevieve shot a questioning glance at Zach, who looked slightly embarrassed. "The doc is discreet," he explained, "and I thought, after everything you've been through." His concern touched her deeply. "Thank you," she said softly, Dr. Watson's examination was thorough but gentle. She pronounced Lily perfectly healthy if slightly underweight, and recommended a regime of proper feeding for both mother and child. She left medicines for various ailments that might arise and promised to return in a fortnight to check on them again. As they stood on the porch watching the doctor ride away, Genevieve turned to Zach. "A fortnight? You expect us to be here that long?" He looked down at her, his expression serious. "Mrs. Radcliff, Genevieve, please," she interrupted. After all they'd been through, formality seemed unnecessary. "Genevieve," he amended with a slight smile, "I sent those telegrams today. My superiors are organizing a proper pursuit of Vernon and his gang. They've been wanted for more than just harassing you. There's cattle rustling, stagecoach robbery, and other charges pending against them." "That's good news, isn't it?" He nodded slowly. "It is, but these things take time. And meanwhile, you need a safe place to recover your strength and decide what you want to do next." He hesitated. "I thought, well, you're welcome to stay here as long as you need. The cabin's snug, there's good hunting, and the nearest town isn't too far." Genevieve stared at him. "That's very generous, but I couldn't impose. It's no imposition," he cut in. "Truth is, I'm not here much anyway. My job keeps me on the trail more often than not." He looked almost bashful as he added, "It might be nice knowing the place isn't sitting empty all the time." "What about your reputation?" she asked softly. "A single man housing a widow and her child. People will talk." Zach's lips quirked in a half-smile. "Let them. I've never much cared what folks say about me." His expression grew more serious. "Unless that concerns you, it should have." A lady of proper upbringing would have been scandalized by the very suggestion. But Genevieve had learned the hard way that propriety offered little protection in the real world. "No," she finally said. "It doesn't, and thank you will stay, at least until it's safe." That night, despite Genevieve's protests, Zach once again slept by the fire while she and Lily took his bed. As she drifted toward sleep, she found herself wondering about the contradictions in this man who had saved her life, the hard-edged lawman who read poetry to infants, the solitary bachelor with a cabin full of books, the dangerous gunslinger with gentle hands. For the first time since Thomas died, Genevieve fell asleep thinking about tomorrow with curiosity instead of dread. The days took on an unexpected rhythm. Zach spent mornings hunting or tending to chores around the property, while Genevieve managed the domestic affairs of the cabin. She discovered a vegetable garden behind the cabin, somewhat neglected but salvageable, and set about bringing it back to life. Lily thrived in the peaceful surroundings, growing plumper and more alert with each passing day. In the afternoons, when the baby napped, Genevieve often found Zach sitting on the porch, cleaning his guns or whittling small wooden animals. She would join him with mending or shelling peas, and gradually, they began to talk. He told her about growing up the son of a farmer who had moved west seeking better opportunities, about his mother who insisted on education even in the wilderness, about joining the Marshals after witnessing too many good people suffering at the hands of those who thought themselves above the law. In turn, Genevieve shared stories of her childhood in Ohio, where her father had been a schoolteacher. She spoke of meeting Thomas at a church social when she was 19, of their dreams of building a life in the West, and of the crushing blow when he died just months after Lily was born. "I never expected to be alone," she admitted one afternoon, 3 weeks into her stay. "Thomas and we had so many plans." Zach was quiet for a long moment, his hand stilling on the piece of pine he was carving. "Life out here rarely goes according to plan," he finally said. "That's its burden and its blessing, I suppose, forces you to adapt, to find new paths." "Is that why you never married?" The question slipped out before she could reconsider it. "I'm sorry, that's too personal." "No, it's a fair question." He set down his knife and the half-formed wooden fox. "The truth is, this job doesn't lend itself to family life. I'm gone for weeks sometimes, tracking outlaws across territories where there's no law but what I bring with me." A shadow crossed his face. "I've seen what happens to the wives and children of men in my position when the wrong people want revenge. Wouldn't wish that fear on anyone." There was something in his voice that suggested personal experience, but Genevieve didn't press. Instead, she asked, "Don't you get lonely?" The look he gave her then was startlingly honest. Yes, he said simply. But loneliness seemed a fair price for keeping others safe. The depth of his conviction moved her. This was a man who had chosen a solitary path not out of selfishness, but out of a profound sense of duty. It made her own troubles seem smaller somehow. "Any word on Vernon and his gang?" she asked, changing the subject. Zach nodded. "Got a telegram yesterday when I was in town. They were spotted near the Colorado border. Marshals from the Denver office are closing in." Relief washed through her. "So it might be over soon. Looks that way." He picked up his carving again, his expression unreadable. "You'll be free to move on whenever you want." Genevieve looked out at the pine forest surrounding the cabin, at the garden where shoots of new vegetables were pushing through the soil, at the makeshift cradle Zach had built for Lily that now sat on the porch beside them. The thought of leaving filled her with an unexpected sadness. "I'm not sure where I'd go," she admitted. "My parents are gone. Thomas's family never approved of me. I have a cousin in San Francisco, but we haven't spoken in years." "You're educated," Zach pointed out. "Could teach school somewhere, with a baby." Most towns won't hire a teacher with a child, let alone a widow with no husband to vouch for her character. The bitterness in her voice surprised even her. Zach was silent for a long while. Then, without looking at her, he said, "You could stay. Here, I mean." Genevieve's heart skipped. "As your housekeeper." Now he did meet her eyes, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. "No, not as my housekeeper." Before he could elaborate, a cry from inside the cabin signaled Lily's awakening from her nap. The moment broken, Genevieve hurried inside, her cheeks flushed and her thoughts in turmoil. That evening, a summer storm rolled in from the mountains, bringing with it slashing rain and booming thunder that rattled the cabin's windows. Lily was fussy, frightened by the noise, and it took hours to settle her. By the time the baby finally slept, Genevieve was exhausted. She found Zach by the fire, a book open on his lap but his gaze fixed on the flames. "She's asleep," Genevieve said softly, sinking into the chair opposite him. Finally, he looked up and the firelight caught the angles of his face, softening them. "Storms can be frightening for little ones," he said, "and for grown folks too sometimes." As if to punctuate his words, a particularly loud crack of thunder shook the cabin. Genevieve flinched despite herself, and Zach smiled gently. "My mother used to say thunder was just the angels rearranging furniture in heaven," he told her, closing his book. "Never quite believed it, but it was a nice thought on nights like this." Genevieve smiled at the image. "My father said it was God bowling." Zach chuckled, a warm sound that seemed to fill the small space between them. "I like that one better." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the storm rage outside while snug within the cabin's sturdy walls. Genevieve found herself studying Zach's profile in the flickering light, noting the strong line of his jaw, the small scar near his left eyebrow, the way his hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck. "About what you said earlier," she finally ventured, her voice barely audible over the rain drumming on the roof. "About me staying." Zach turned to face her fully, his expression carefully controlled. "I meant it," he said, "but I don't want you to feel obligated or pressured. You've had enough of that in your life." "What exactly are you offering, Zach?" she asked directly, summoning her courage. He set the book aside and leaned forward, his forearms resting on his knees. "I'm not good with words, not like the poets in those books," he began, gesturing to the shelves. "But these past weeks, having you and Lily here." He paused, searching for the right phrases. The cabin's never felt like a home before, just a place to sleep between assignments. Now it does. Genevieve's heart pounded in her chest. "Because we've made it more comfortable." "Because you're in it," he said simply. "I know it hasn't been long. I know you're still grieving Thomas, and I would never want to dishonor that. But I also know that out here, life moves differently. Time works differently." He met her gaze steadily. "I care for you, Genevieve, and for Lily too. If you wanted, we could build something here, together." The directness of his words both startled and touched her. There was no artifice to Zach, no games or hidden meanings, just honest emotion offered without expectation. "I care for you too," she admitted, her voice catching. "More than I expected to, more than I thought I could after Thomas." Relief and happiness lit his face. "Then stay," he said softly. Not as my housekeeper, not as someone under my protection, but as a partner, and maybe in time as more. Another crack of thunder sounded, but Genevieve barely noticed it. All she could see was the man before her, strong yet gentle, dangerous yet kind, solitary yet yearning for connection, just as she was. "I'll stay," she whispered. And when he stood and crossed to her chair, kneeling before her and taking her hands in his much larger ones, she didn't pull away. "I'll court you proper," he promised, his thumbs tracing circles on her palms. "As slow or as fast as you want, but I needed you to know my intentions." Genevieve looked into his clear blue eyes and saw a future she hadn't dared to imagine. "I think I'd like that very much, Marshal Jennings," she said, a smile tugging at her lips. He raised one of her hands to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Then it's settled," he said, his voice husky with emotion. Outside, the storm began to abate, the spaces between thunderclaps growing longer, the rain gentling from a downpour to a steady patter. Inside, a different kind of storm was brewing, one of hope and possibility, of second chances neither of them had expected to find. True to his word, Zach courted Genevieve with patient determination over the coming weeks. He brought her wildflowers from his rides, carved wooden toys for Lily, and read aloud in the evenings from his collection of books. When he had to leave for his martial duties, he always told her exactly where he was going and when he expected to return, and he always came back when he said he would, often bearing small gifts from town. For Genevieve, who had known only uncertainty and fear for so long, his reliability was as powerful as any grand gesture of romance. By late summer, the garden was flourishing under Genevieve's care, providing fresh vegetables for their table. Zach had built a small pen for chickens and traded for 6 hens that now provided eggs regularly. They had settled into a comfortable domesticity that felt natural, as though they had been living this way for years, rather than months. One August evening, as golden light slanted through the pines and cicadas hummed in the warm air, Zach returned from a 4-day absence looking troubled. Genevieve, who had been hanging laundry with Lily playing on a blanket nearby, knew immediately that something was wrong. "What is it?" she asked as he dismounted, her hands stilling on the damp sheet she'd been about to pin to the line. Zach took off his hat and ran a hand through his hair. "Vernon's gang has been captured," he said. "All except Vernon himself." Genevieve's blood ran cold. "He's still out there." The others claimed they split up weeks ago after a disagreement, said Vernon was headed back east, but no one spotted him. Zach crossed to her, taking her hands in his. "It could mean nothing. He might be long gone, but I wanted you to know." She appreciated his honesty, even as fear coiled in her stomach. "Do you think he'd come looking for me after all this time?" "Vernon Miller isn't known for his forgiving nature," Zach admitted, "but he'd have to be a fool to try anything now. There are wanted posters with his face in every town from here to Missouri. Men like Vernon don't always act rationally," Genevieve pointed out, remembering the hatred in the man's eyes the night Zach had rescued her from behind the church. "No, they don't," he agreed. "Which is why I've asked for a temporary reassignment. Local duties only, no long-tracking expeditions. My superior wasn't happy about it, but he agreed." Zach's eyes were steady on hers. "I'm not leaving you and Lily unprotected, not until we know Vernon's been captured." Relief flooded through her, followed quickly by guilt. "I don't want to be the reason you can't do your job," she protested. "You and Lily are more important than any job," he said firmly. Then more softly, "You're my family now, even if we haven't made it official." The word official hung in the air between them. They hadn't discussed marriage explicitly, though Genevieve knew it was what Zach wanted. She wanted it too, but something had been holding her back, some combination of loyalty to Thomas's memory and fear of building another life only to lose it again. Looking at Zach now, his face lined with concern for her and Lily, Genevieve realized how foolish her hesitation had been. Life offered no guarantees, but it did offer choices, and she chose this man who had proven his devotion 1,000 times over. "Let's make it official then," she said quietly. Zach's expression shifted from worry to confusion, then to dawning hope. "Are you saying?" "I'm saying yes," Genevieve clarified, a smile breaking through her serious demeanor. If you're asking, that is. In answer, Zach gathered her into his arms, lifting her off her feet in an exuberant embrace that made her laugh out loud. From her blanket, Lily cooed in delight at the sight of her mother's happiness. "I've been carrying this for weeks, waiting for the right moment," Zach confessed, setting Genevieve down and reaching into his vest pocket. He pulled out a simple gold band with a small pearl set in it. "It was my mother's," he explained. "My father gave it to me before he died, said I should save it for when I found a woman worthy of it." Tears welled in Genevieve's eyes as he knelt before her, right there in the dirt yard with the laundry flapping around them and Lily babbling nearby. "Genevieve Radcliff, will you marry me? Will you and Lily be my family officially and forever?" "Yes," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes to all of it." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to kiss her with all the pent-up passion of their months of careful courtship, Genevieve felt truly safe for the first time since Thomas's death. Not just protected, though Zach certainly offered that, but safe in the knowledge that she had found a rare and precious love, against all odds and expectations. They were married 2 weeks later in the same church behind which Zach had found her that fateful night. The irony wasn't lost on either of them, but it felt right, somehow a way of transforming what had been a place of fear into one of joy. The small ceremony was attended by Dr. Watson, the local minister and his wife, and a handful of Zach's colleagues from the Marshal's service. Lily, now nearly 8 months old and recently taking her first tentative steps, was passed from lap to lap, charming everyone with her sunny disposition and Thomas's dark eyes. As they exchanged vows, Genevieve wore a new dress of pale blue calico, sewn by the minister's wife as a wedding gift. Zach had splurged on a new suit, looking so handsome in it that Genevieve could hardly believe this imposing, respected lawman was choosing to bind his life to hers. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared. "You may kiss your bride, Marshal." As Zach's lips met hers in a kiss that promised both tenderness and passion, Genevieve heard someone whisper, "Never thought I'd see the day when Zachary Jennings settled down." Neither had she, but she thanked God every day for bringing him to her rescue behind that little church in Redemption Creek. Their first months of marriage passed in a haze of happiness. Zach, true to his word, took only local assignments, returning to their cabin each night. They expanded the garden, added a room to the cabin for Lily, and began planning for the future in earnest. With Vernon still unaccounted for, they remained cautious, but the immediate fear had faded with time. Then, on a crisp October morning, everything changed. Genevieve was alone at the cabin, Lily napping after a morning of energetic exploration of the yard. Zach had ridden to the nearest town to meet with his superior about a series of minor thefts in the area. He'd promised to be back by sundown. The snap of a twig behind the cabin was her only warning. She turned from the stove where she'd been stirring a pot of stew to find Vernon Miller standing in her doorway, a shotgun cradled in his arms and hatred burning in his bloodshot eyes. "Well, well," he drawled, his voice slurring slightly from what smelled like cheap whiskey. "The Marshal's woman, heard you two got hitched, ain't that sweet?" Genevieve's heart hammered against her ribs, but she kept her expression neutral. "Mr. Miller," she acknowledged, her mind racing. Zach's revolver was in the bedroom. Lily was asleep just beyond the thin wall separating the main room from her nursery. "Don't Mr. Miller me, you murdering bitch," Vernon spat. "You killed my brother, shot him dead, and ran like the coward you are." "Your brother was trying to force himself on me," Genevieve replied steadily, though her hands trembled at her sides. "I asked him to leave. He wouldn't." Vernon's face contorted with rage. "Liar, Frank wouldn't have to force himself on no woman, especially not some scrawny widow." He gestured with the shotgun. "Where's that brat of yours? Heard you got one. Might have to teach it a lesson about what happens when its mama crosses the wrong people." Cold fear gripped Genevieve's heart, but with it came a surge of protective fury unlike anything she'd ever experienced. She would die before she let this man harm her child. "My daughter is with Dr. Watson in town," she lied smoothly. "Has been all day." Vernon's eyes narrowed suspiciously, but before he could question her further, a baby's cry sounded from the next room. Lily had awakened from her nap. "Well now," Vernon smirked, Seems like you're a liar just like your Marshal. He took a step toward the nursery, and Genevieve moved without thinking, placing herself between him and the door. "You'll have to kill me first," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "That was always the plan, lady." Vernon raised the shotgun, aiming it at her chest. "Just didn't expect to get to the brat too, that's a bonus." Time seemed to slow. Genevieve saw his finger tighten on the trigger. She thought of Zach, of the life they'd just begun building, of how he would blame himself for not being here to protect them. She thought of Lily, who would grow up never knowing how fiercely she was loved. And then she thought of the cast iron skillet on the stove behind her, still hot from cooking. In one fluid motion, she grabbed the heavy pan and flung it with all her strength at Vernon's head. The scalding metal struck him squarely in the face, sending him reeling backward with a howl of pain. The shotgun discharged, but the shot went wild, splintering the ceiling as Vernon stumbled. Genevieve didn't hesitate. She lunged for the bedroom, for Zach's revolver in the drawer by their bed. Vernon, his face blistering from the burn, recovered enough to lurch after her, catching her by the hair and yanking her backward with such force that stars exploded behind her eyes. "You'll pay for that," he snarled, spittle flying from his lips as he slammed her against the wall. His hands closed around her throat, cutting off her air. Genevieve clawed at his wrists, her vision beginning to tunnel as oxygen deprivation set in. Lily's cries had become frantic now, but they seemed distant, as though coming from far away. Darkness crept in at the edges of her consciousness. Then suddenly, Vernon's grip slackened. His eyes widened in shock, and he looked down at his chest where a spreading crimson stain was blooming. He collapsed to his knees, then toppled forward, revealing Zach standing in the doorway, his pistol still raised and smoking. "Genevieve." He shouted, holstering his weapon and rushing to her as she slid down the wall, gasping for air. "My God, are you hurt? Is Lily, we're both okay," she managed, her voice a raspy whisper as she clutched at her bruised throat. "You came back early." "Thank God I did," he breathed, gathering her into his arms with desperate gentleness. "I had a feeling, call it instinct, that something wasn't right. Rode back as fast as I could." Over his shoulder, Genevieve could see Vernon's motionless form, blood pooling beneath him on their cabin floor. She felt no satisfaction in his death, only profound relief that the threat he posed was finally, truly over. Zach pressed his face into her hair, his breath coming in uneven gasps that told her how close he'd come to losing control. "If he had hurt you if I had been too late, you weren't," she soothed, finding strength despite her ordeal. "You saved us, again." He pulled back to look at her, his eyes fierce with emotion. "No, Genevieve, you saved yourself. That burn on his face, you fought back, you bought time." Pride mingled with the fear and love in his expression. "You're the strongest woman I've ever known." Lily's cries had subsided to hiccuping sobs, and Genevieve moved to go to her, but Zach held her back. "Let me check on her," he said. "You rest for a moment." As he disappeared into the nursery, Genevieve sagged against the wall, the adrenaline draining from her system. Her throat throbbed, and she knew bruises would bloom there by morning. But she was alive. Lily was alive, and Vernon Miller would never threaten them again. When Zach returned, Lily cradled securely in his arms, Genevieve felt a wave of love so powerful it brought tears to her eyes. This was her family not by blood, but by choice and circumstance and love. They had faced the worst together and survived. "We should leave," Zach said, surveying the grim scene. "I'll handle the body and the report later. Right now, I want you both away from here." They spent that night at Dr. Watson's home in town. The doctor treated the bruising on Genevieve's neck and declared that while painful, there would be no lasting damage. Zach arranged for Vernon's body to be dealt with and filed his report with his superiors, who ruled the shooting a clear case of self-defense in the line of duty. By the time they returned to the cabin 3 days later, all signs of the violence that had occurred there were gone. Zach had hired men to clean thoroughly, replace the damaged ceiling, and even repaint the walls where blood had stained them. Still, as Genevieve stood in the doorway, Lily balanced on her hip, she hesitated. "Do you think we can still be happy here, after what happened?" Zach placed a gentle hand on the small of her back. "This is our home," he said firmly. "We've fought for it, bled for it." I won't let Vernon Miller take it from us, not even in death." His determination gave her courage. They entered together, a united front against the shadows of the past. That night, after Lily was asleep in her crib, Genevieve and Zach sat before the fire, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against his chest. The steady beat of his heart beneath her ear reassured her that they had indeed survived, that life would continue. "I've been thinking," Zach said quietly, his fingers absently stroking her arm. "My contract with the Marshal's service ends next spring. I've served for almost 10 years now." Genevieve looked up at him, surprised. "Are you considering not renewing?" He nodded slowly. "This job. It's taken more from me than it's given, and now I have you and Lily to consider." His eyes met hers, serious but lit with hope. "The ranch next to ours is for sale. Good land, water rights already established. If we combined it with this property, we'd have enough to run a decent herd of cattle. Maybe some horses too. You want to be a rancher." The idea was unexpected but not unwelcome. "I want to be home," he corrected gently. "I want to watch Lily grow up. I want more children with you if you're willing. I want to build something that will last beyond us." He cupped her face in his hand. "What do you think? Could you be happy as a rancher's wife instead of a marshal's?" Genevieve smiled, covering his hand with her own. "I could be happy as your wife, Zach, no matter what you choose to do." She leaned up to kiss him softly. "But yes, I think building a ranch together sounds like a wonderful future." Relief and joy transformed his features. "Then it's settled. Come spring, Marshal Jennings retires and Zachary Jennings, rancher, begins a new chapter." As he sealed the promise with a deeper kiss, Genevieve marveled at the twists of fate that had brought them to this moment. From terror behind a church to love before a hearth. From a desperate widow with no options to a wife and mother with a future full of possibilities. "I love you," she whispered against his lips. "Thank you for finding me that night. I'll always find you," he promised. "Wherever you are, whatever you need, you and Lily will never have to hide again." And in the years that followed, he kept that promise. Spring arrived with a riot of wildflowers and new beginnings. True to his word, Zach declined to renew his contract with the Marshal's service, turning in his badge in a simple ceremony that was attended by his colleagues and superiors. There were jokes about him being finally caught by a pretty face, but the respect in the other lawmen's eyes was evident as they wished him well in his new endeavors. With his savings and a small loan from the bank, they purchased the neighboring property and began the work of transforming their homestead into a working ranch. They started small, with 20 head of cattle and 3 horses besides Zach's faithful gelding. They named the ranch Sanctuary, a private acknowledgement of what they had found in each other. By Lily's 2nd birthday, the ranch was beginning to prosper. The cattle herd had grown, and Zach had begun breeding horses as well, discovering a talent for working with the animals that surprised even him. Genevieve managed the household accounts with the same precision she had once applied to her father's classroom lessons, proving herself an invaluable partner in their new venture. That autumn, as the aspen trees turned golden on the mountainsides, Genevieve shared the news she had suspected for several weeks. They were expecting a child of their own. Zach's joy was boundless. He lifted her off her feet and spun her around, much as he had done the day she agreed to marry him, then immediately set her down with apologies, fearful of harming her or the baby. His concern made Genevieve laugh. "I'm not made of porcelain, Zach," she teased. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time." "Not my baby," he replied solemnly. "Not our baby." His wonder at the process of pregnancy touched her deeply. He insisted on taking over the heaviest household chores as her condition progressed, reading every book on childbirth he could find, and even building a proper cradle with his own hands, carving delicate woodland creatures along its edges. Lily, now old enough to understand that a new brother or sister was coming, patted Genevieve's growing belly with solemn importance each night, telling the baby about all the things they would do together. Her acceptance of the changing family dynamics eased one of Genevieve's few concerns about the pregnancy. Winter settled over the ranch, bringing with it peaceful evenings by the fire and the quiet anticipation of spring's new arrivals. Both the baby and the season's calves and foals. Zach and Genevieve spent these months planning for the future, adding a new room to the cabin for the growing family and discussing potential names for their child. It was during one such evening in February, with snow falling softly outside and Lily already asleep in her room, that Genevieve felt the first twinges of labor. She had been expecting it, the baby was due any day, but still, the reality of it sent a flutter of anxiety through her. "Zach," she said, her hand moving to her rounded belly as a contraction tightened across it. "I think it's time." His head snapped up from the ledger he'd been reviewing, eyes wide with alarm and excitement. "Now, are you sure?" she nodded, smiling despite the discomfort. "Your son or daughter seems eager to meet us." What followed was a flurry of activity. Zach had prepared for this moment with characteristic thoroughness. He sent their ranch hand, a reliable young man named Tom, to fetch Dr. Watson from town, stoked the fire to warm the cabin thoroughly, and brought out the clean linens they had set aside for the birth. Through it all, Genevieve watched him with love and amusement. This man, who had faced down the most dangerous outlaws without flinching, was nearly undone by the prospect of her giving birth. "Zach," she called softly as he rushed past her for the third time, carrying yet another blanket. "Come here." He was at her side instantly, concern etched into his features. "What is it? What do you need?" She took his hand and placed it on her belly just as another contraction began. "Feel that? That's our child preparing to join us. It's natural, Zach. It's beautiful." She smiled up at him. "And I need you to be calm, because this might take a while and I can't have you wearing yourself out before the real work begins." He took a deep breath, visibly steadying himself. "You're right, of course you're right." He pressed his forehead to hers. "Tell me what you need, I'm here." "Just stay with me," she said simply. And he did, through the long hours that followed. Dr. Watson arrived as the labor intensified, bringing her experienced hands and calm demeanor to the birthing room. Zach never left Genevieve's side, supporting her through each contraction, wiping her brow, murmuring encouragement even when her grip on his hand became painful enough to make his fingers turn white. As dawn broke over the snow-covered landscape, their son entered the world with a lusty cry that brought tears to Zach's eyes. Dr. Watson cleaned and swaddled the infant before placing him in Genevieve's arms. "He's perfect," Genevieve whispered, counting tiny fingers and toes, marveling at the thatch of dark hair that already resembled his father's. Zach, sitting on the edge of the bed beside her, seemed unable to speak. He reached out a tentative finger to touch the baby's cheek, his expression one of awe and disbelief. "Would you like to hold your son, Marshal?" Dr. Watson asked with a knowing smile, still using his former title out of habit. Genevieve carefully transferred the newborn to Zach's arms. The sight of her strong, capable husband cradling their tiny son with such gentleness brought fresh tears to her eyes. "Hello, little man," Zach whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "I've been waiting to meet you." When Lily was brought in later that morning to meet her brother, her solemn acceptance of this new member of the family completed the perfect tableau. Genevieve, watching her husband and children together, felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. They named the baby Thomas Zachary Jennings, honoring both Genevieve's first husband and the man who had given her a second chance at happiness. "Do you think he would mind?" Genevieve had asked Zach when she suggested the name, referring to the ghost of her first love. "I think he would be grateful," Zach had replied thoughtfully, "that his son has a sister and a brother, and that you're loved as you deserve to be." He had kissed her then, sealing his acceptance of this acknowledgement of her past. The years flowed onward, marked by the changing seasons and the growth of their family and ranch. Thomas, called Tommy by everyone except his father, who preferred his full name, was joined 2 years later by a sister, Eleanor, named for the doctor who had become a dear friend to the family. Sanctuary Ranch prospered under their joint stewardship. Zach's breeding program produced horses sought after throughout the territory, while Genevieve's careful management ensured their financial stability. They added to the original cabin until it became a proper ranch house, with separate bedrooms for each child, a study for Genevieve's books, and a wide veranda where the family gathered on summer evenings. Lily grew into a beautiful young woman with her mother's intelligence and her birth father's artistic talent. By the time she was 16, she was teaching art to the younger children in the local school and dreaming of attending a women's college back east. A dream Zach and Genevieve encouraged wholeheartedly. Tommy, at 14, was already showing his father's build and his mother's quiet determination. He spent his days learning every aspect of ranch management, declaring his intention to take over the operation someday. Eleanor, their spirited 11-year-old, divided her time between helping her mother with household tasks and following her father and brother around the ranch, insisting she could do anything they could do. On the 10th anniversary of their wedding, Zach surprised Genevieve with a small gathering of friends at the ranch. Dr. Watson, now retired but still spry, was there, along with several of Zach's former Marshal colleagues and their families, and neighbors from the surrounding ranches. As twilight fell and lanterns were lit around the yard, Zach asked for everyone's attention. He stood on the porch steps, looking handsome and distinguished with silver beginning to thread through his dark hair at the temples. 10 years ago, he began, his deep voice carrying across the assembled guests, I found a woman hiding behind a church with her baby, running for her life. His eyes found Genevieve in the crowd, standing with their children. I told her she would never have to hide again. It was the easiest promise I ever made, because from the moment I saw her, I knew I would do anything to keep her safe. Murmurs of appreciation rippled through the gathering. Many knew parts of their story, though few knew all of it. What I didn't know then was how much she would give me in return, Zach continued, his voice softening. A family, a home, a purpose beyond the badge I wore. Genevieve, he held out his hand to her, and she moved forward to take it, climbing the steps to stand beside him. You made me believe in second chances, in the possibility that even in this wild country, there can be tenderness and grace. Tears shimmered in Genevieve's eyes as he drew a small box from his pocket. Inside was a delicate gold locket on a fine chain. It's not much compared to what you've given me, he said, opening the locket to reveal tiny portraits of their 3 children. But I wanted you to have something to carry them close to your heart, even when they begin to make their own way in the world. As he fastened the locket around her neck, their guests applauded, moved by this public declaration of a love that had only deepened with time. Later that night, after the guests had departed and the children were asleep, Genevieve and Zach sat together on the porch swing he had built when she was pregnant with Tommy. The stars scattered across the vast Wyoming sky seemed to mirror the contentment in their hearts. Did you ever imagine, Genevieve asked softly, her head resting on his shoulder, when you found me that night that we would end up here? Zach's arm tightened around her. No, he admitted. I only knew I needed to get you safely away. I didn't dare hope for more than that. And now. He turned to face her, the lines at the corners of his eyes crinkling with his smile. Now I know that finding you was the beginning of everything good in my life. He brushed a tendril of hair from her face, his touch as reverent as it had been on their wedding day. I love you, Genevieve Jennings. More today than yesterday, and not as much as I will tomorrow. As their lips met in a kiss that held both the comfort of familiarity and the enduring spark of passion, Genevieve reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From terror to safety, from loss to love, from hiding to belonging. She had once cowered behind a church, certain her life was over. Instead, it had only been beginning. The baby who had cried in her arms that night was now a young woman with dreams as vast as the Wyoming sky. The man who had promised she would never hide again had kept his word in ways neither of them could have anticipated. And the family they had built together was a testament to the healing power of love and the unexpected gifts of second chances. As the years continued to pass, Sanctuary Ranch became known not only for its fine horses and cattle, but also as a place of refuge for those in need. Travelers stranded by storms, families down on their luck, women fleeing situations not unlike Genevieve's own, past all found temporary shelter and assistance at the Jennings homestead. You've turned us into a way station, Zach teased his wife one evening after they had sent a young widow and her 2 children on their way with provisions and a letter of introduction to a shop owner in the next town who needed help. Isn't that what sanctuary means? Genevieve replied with a smile. Besides, we have been blessed with so much, it seems only right to share. He couldn't argue with that logic, nor did he want to. It was one of the countless things he loved about her, her generous spirit, her belief that kindness should be paid forward. When Lily turned 18, she was accepted to a women's college in Boston, fulfilling her dream of formal education in art. The day they put her on the eastbound train was bittersweet for the entire family, but especially for Genevieve, who remembered all too well the tiny infant she had clutched to her breast as she ran for their lives. "She'll be fine," Zach assured her as they watched the train pull away from the station, Tommy and Alina waving frantically beside them. "She's strong like her mother, and she knows she always has a home to return to." That home continued to evolve as the children grew. Tommy, true to his word, took on more responsibility at the ranch, proving himself a natural horseman with an instinct for breeding that sometimes surpassed even his father's. Alina, much to everyone's surprise, discovered a passion for medicine after assisting Dr. Watson with a difficult childbirth at a neighboring ranch. By the time she was 16, she was openly discussing her intention to become a doctor, despite the obstacles women faced in the profession. "She gets that determination from you," Zach told Genevieve one evening as they listened to Alina passionately arguing her case for medical school. "I think she gets it from both of us," Genevieve replied, watching their daughter with pride. "Neither of us has ever been one to back down from a challenge." Letters from Lily arrived regularly, full of descriptions of her studies, the friends she was making, and the exhibitions where her work was beginning to attract attention. There were mentions of young men who escorted her to concerts and lectures, but none seemed to have captured her heart in any serious way. "She's focused on her art," Genevieve explained to Zach when he grumbled about these nameless suitors. "Just as you were focused on your badge at her age." "That was different," he protested. "I wasn't surrounded by city boys with fancy manners and no calluses on their hands," Genevieve laughed. "And yet, despite your rough hands and frontier ways, you managed to win my heart. Have a little faith in your daughter's judgment." When Lily returned for Christmas of her second year at college, she brought with her a portfolio of artwork that left her parents speechless with pride. Landscapes of the Wyoming range that captured both its harshness and its beauty. Portraits of her family that revealed the love she felt for each of them. And most surprising of all, a series of sketches depicting the church in Redemption Creek, with a shadowy figure of a woman and infant hiding behind it, and a tall man with a marshal's badge offering his hand. "How did you?" Genevieve began, her voice trailing off as she studied the powerful images. "You've told me the story so many times," Lily explained, watching her mother's face. "About how Dad found us, how he promised we'd never have to hide again. It's our family's beginning. I wanted to honor it." Zach, looking over his wife's shoulder at the drawings, cleared his throat against the emotion that threatened to overwhelm him. "You've captured it perfectly," he said, his voice rough. "The fear, but also the hope." Lily's artwork would eventually hang in galleries across the country, but those first sketches of her family's origin story remained at Sanctuary Ranch, a reminder of how far they had come. By the time Genevieve and Zach celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary, their family had expanded in ways they could never have predicted. Lily had married a fellow artist she met in New York, a kind and talented man who looked at her the way Zach looked at Genevieve. They had settled in Denver, close enough to visit regularly, and were expecting their first child. Tommy had taken over the day-to-day running of the ranch, allowing Zach to focus on the horse breeding program that had become his passion. He was courting the daughter of a neighboring rancher, a match that pleased both families. Alina, against all conventional expectations, had indeed been accepted to medical school in Philadelphia, following in Dr. Watson's pioneering footsteps. Her letters home were filled with equal parts excitement about her studies and frustration at the obstacles still faced by women in the field. On a warm June evening, with the scent of wildflowers drifting through the open windows of their ranch house. Genevieve found Zach sitting on their porch, staring out at the property they had built together. "Penny for your thoughts, Marshal," she said softly, using the old title that had become an endearment between them. He smiled up at her, the years having added character to his handsome face rather than diminishing it. "Just counting my blessings," he replied, pulling her down to sit beside him. "And thinking about how different my life might have been if I hadn't decided to investigate that commotion behind the church that night." Genevieve leaned her head against his shoulder, a position that had become as natural as breathing over their years together. "Do you ever regret it? Giving up your career for this?" She gestured to the ranch spread out before them, the cattle grazing in the distance, the horses in the corral near the barn. "Not for a single moment," Zach said firmly. "The badge was just a thing I wore. This," he tightened his arm around her waist, "this is who I am. A husband, a father, a rancher, a man who found everything he never knew he wanted behind a church one stormy night." Genevieve turned her face up to his, marveling that even after 20 years, the sight of him could still make her heart quicken. "I was so afraid that night," she whispered. "Afraid for Lily, afraid for myself. I never dreamed that the man who found us would save us in so many ways." "You saved yourself," Zach corrected her, as he had so many times over the years. "You had the courage to run, to protect your child, to start over. I just helped a little along the way." She smiled at his modesty, another trait she had come to cherish. "We saved each other," she compromised. "And built something beautiful in the process." As the sun set over Sanctuary Ranch, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Zach and Genevieve remained on the porch, hand in hand, watching the day end and another evening begin. Their story, which had started in fear and desperation behind a small church in Redemption Creek, had transformed into a testament to the enduring power of love, courage, and second chances. The cowboy who had promised a frightened mother that she would never have to hide again had kept his word. And in doing so, he had found his own redemption, his own family, his own place in a wild and beautiful world. As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Genevieve whispered, "Thank you for finding me." And Zach, as he had countless times before, replied, "I'll always find you. Wherever you are, whatever you need." It was a promise that had begun their journey together, and one that would carry them through all the days to come.